Hey everyone, welcome to the final module in this leadership course. So we're going to get right into it. We teach an entire class on ethics in sport, and that's going to be offered in the spring. So a lot of you who are in your first semester will be with me again for that class. And so I kind of want to just touch on some of the high points from chapter 13, because we'll actually use chapter 13 and 16 to get the ball rolling in the next class. So you're kind of ahead of the game. So we will, like I said, have a whole class on this. I guess, I don't know if it's good news or bad news, but there is never a lack of material when it comes to ethics. It seems like there's always something new popping up. I do think that we have a tendency to dwell a lot on maybe the ethically bankrupt or the people who make mistakes or the wrongdoing, the scandals, rather than the good. And there's a lot of good out there that people are doing. And that's something that we'll highlight in the class as well. If you're reading the chapter, what you kind of see is initially there wasn't that much theory around ethical leadership, but it's popped up a little bit more. But kind of what they try to introduce, there are some concepts that serve as a guide or a roadmap of sorts, which will be an exercise for you in the spring semester. So, what do we talk about with ethics? Comes from the Greek word ethos. You've probably heard that before, for customs, conduct, and character. But basically, it's who are you and what do you believe in, right? So that's really what we're talking about here: your motives, your intentions. So for Kohlberg's stages of moral development, I have a link, and I'll post this in the module as well, to an interactive video on the Heinz dilemma. And I think it might be, I enjoyed taking it, because basically what the Heinz dilemma is telling you, it's not the what you would do that kind of determines where you are in the stages, but it kind of the why or the why not, your reason for your decision is what places you in the different stage. So for me, I'm kind of right here bordering on law and order and social contracts. My friends have heard me say, I don't follow the rules I don't believe in. Obviously, I'm not going to break any laws or anything like that, but it's definitely something that I've learned about myself as I've gotten older. And I think that the maturity goes hand in hand with these moral stages. And so watch the video, see what you think. Basically, the dilemma is that there's a married couple and the woman's very sick and the husband can't afford the drug and the drug company won't lower the price. And so what should the man do is the dilemma. And then it kind of plays out from there. So check that out. Understand basically the different phases and stages of what Kohlberg is saying. I definitely see this playing out in parenting, but I also think it's an interesting way to think about maybe where your student athletes or your team is at, if you're in administration or working at a school. Toxic triangle. So rather than using some real life examples for this one, I immediately thought of Darth Vader. Obviously, the dark side goes really hand in hand with Star Wars. We're right in the thick of Mandalorian as well, so big Star Wars fan. But I thought of Anakin Skywalker, and I thought about how in the book, it talks about how these key life events kind of impact and lead to destructive leaders. He had one when his mom died, right? And he could never let go of that anger and that rage, and he just carried it with him. But definitely charismatic. Definitely found himself in a place of power. Narcissism, that's a conversation for another day, but some negative life themes, and he really, the ideology of hate, right? That's the whole dark side in Star Wars. And so I thought of him. I mean, like, this is kind of the perfect storm. I think that if we really examined our history as a society, we'd have some pretty good examples. I think the first one that everyone would think of would be Nazi Germany, and Adolf Hitler, right? So just something to be aware of. I think this is a really good tool for when to kind of keep yourself in check a little bit, I think, too, right? Because I do think charisma is one of those things that can be a really super strength and advantage, or it could be your downfall, right? So pay close attention to that part of the chapter. So 5 principles of ethical leadership. 2 things to kind of point out here. I don't think any of these, these 5 items are a surprise for anyone. But I would encourage you to think about, from the theories that you've learned about, right, this semester, where do you see these 5 elements carrying over? So like, I think of authentic leadership, I think of servant leadership, I think of transformational leadership. Those would be the first 3, you know, LMX, maybe with the building community, right? So I think that start thinking about how, like, if, and we'll get to this later, but for leadership theory to have ethics at the core, what theories are doing a really good job of that right now? What theories are putting ethics and values as a cornerstone, right? Also, a note on honesty, and just something that I've been kind of in a bit of a space with right now, but yeah, I like this quote from Brené Brown: "Not a fan of anything that's brutal, including honesty. Honesty is the best policy, but honesty that's motivated by shame, anger, fear, or hurt is not honesty. It's shame, anger, fear, or hurt disguised as honesty." And so she's really kind of tackling at the intent behind what people are saying and communication. We have right now opportunities to communicate very differently, and some would even say that it's easier probably to have that brutal honesty because a lot of us are just typing from a phone or on a screen or messaging or something like that. And so I would just encourage you to think about when you feel like you're being that direct, honest communicator, what's your motive? What's the intent behind what you're saying? So ethics and leadership in sport. So a couple things that we'll of course go into more. Why is it important? Well, just a couple things, right? There are obviously rules, there's compliance, so you got to follow. You have to operate within the system. Fairness, which is not my favorite word, but having a level playing field, you know, which we'll get into that as well with kind of the arms race in college athletics with facilities, et cetera. And then mentorship, which is probably the biggest one, right? Like, we're guiding the next generation. So ethics should be at the center of those relationships and of that leadership. There's an ever-changing landscape of rules, so just being able to keep up, you know, what you could do last year, you might not be able to do this year. Shift in leadership priorities. I think now that we're seeing so many of these scandals, you know, the most recent, biggest one, I think, being the men's basketball with Adidas and all the Arizona and the agent and Will Wade and Louisville, that we're seeing all this stuff. I think we're seeing a shift in, well, let me say this. People are saying that they are emphasizing transparency and authenticity when they're choosing leaders, when they're choosing coaches they want to play for, when they're choosing where they want to work. Whether or not that's actually happened, that's a good question. But people are saying that these things, transparency, authenticity, vulnerability, matter more to them. And then, you know, a couple of ways where we get ourselves in trouble, and obviously this isn't an exhaustive list, but, you know, winning at all costs, the pressure to win, the pressure to recruit the top 25 class, right? Having multiple phones, maybe multiple email addresses, all those sorts of things, keeping secrets. And then this idea of putting folks, these coaches, on a pedestal, and they're seen as being untouchable. And so who is going to call someone out if this person who's been doing this for decades and is one of the most winningest, right, and has statues made of them, who's going to call that person out, right? Who's going to have the guts to do those things? So strengths and weaknesses. Okay. There is a very high demand for moral leadership. I think we're seeing that, especially right now in the midst of COVID and hard decisions that are having to be made from a financial standpoint. Ethics should be considered more widely in leadership theory. It deserves a central place. So I think that as we kind of move forward with, I actually just listened to a video from Brené Brown, and I'll post that as well. But she's talking about, you know, where's leadership going, and we need leaders to be braver. And I think that if you're going to be a brave person, you really have to know who you are, and you really have to have some conviction to you. And so absolutely, ethics should have a central place in leadership. And also, ethics has stood the test of time, right? This is something that we've been talking about, you know, since the Greek philosophers, right? So values, right and wrong, good and bad, is our morality is something that has been part of the conversation since forever. Not strengths. So there's not a lot of like hardcore empirical data out there on ethical leadership. There's a couple of, you know, just a few who maybe are bringing some personal bias to that, and there's generational gaps in the research. It's not worldly enough with the data. Like a lot of the folks who are writing on this is just coming from a certain part of the world. And, you know, we also have to keep it up to date. Like how are our morals and values and the thoughts on ethics changing as our world changes? Are we keeping up? So food for thought, and I touched on this, but something for you to think about. Do you have your own personal decision-making process? What do you do when your gut doesn't necessarily fail you, but your gut can't get the job done like that, right? And then maybe it takes a little bit more time. Maybe you need to sit with it. What are you doing in that time when you sit, right? What's your process kind of like? And so I just wanted to leave you with that. Like I said, we're gonna roll up our sleeves and dig into this next semester, but hopefully this is a good little cherry on top for the semester, and we finish strong with those leadership projects. Okay, go Tigers.